We saw it, Wolf. We saw the premier match of LCK, Gen.G versus T1 this week. It underdelivered in every single way that we could have possibly hoped for, except for the fact that T1 fans are brutally disappointed, which I always enjoy. So that was the one takeaway from this, is that I don't have to listen to their insanity for a while after they got completely and utterly destroyed by Gen.G.
It wasn't close. And there were a lot of, mistakes in those games from T1, and Gen.G is a super punishing team. I went to that series, I told everyone, because a lot of people asked me going to that series what I thought was going to happen. I said I went 55-45 Gen.G. I thought the top lane might end up being a problem because we just don't have that much data on Zeus. He's only played Aatrox basically this season, and we don't know what it means if he gets challenged by Keen, and if Keen has a cool matchup prepared for him because Keen has a huge champion pool. And I said what I want is a game where one team has a lead and the other team outplays them and has a comeback, because we just don't see that in the LCK at all anymore. You get ahead, you win the game. It takes 30 minutes. Go next. Go next. Go next. I feel like we very rarely, outside of a few crazy bad misplays or fuck ups, to be honest, like you almost always win if you're ahead at like 12 minutes in the game in the LCK right now. And these two teams are the best at pushing advantages super hard. Well, guess what? Gen.G got ahead in both games. They didn't let it go. They won. It was boring. I
It was
wanted to
very
come back. I
boring.
wanted a cool outplay. I wanted to see like, oh, maybe one of these teams actually has a really cool way to catch up from behind against the other one, but it didn't happen.
Can we discuss your hat that says "no good at any sports"?
I'm not
Not good
good.
at any sport.
I'm not good at any sports. No, my wife bought this hat, and she sent me a picture of it when she was shopping, and she was like, "I kind of like this hat," and I was like, "Well, can we share it? Because I think the hat is perfect because I'm not good at any sports." Um, and I was kind of good at fencing and track and field when I was in high school, but that was a long time ago. If it said not good at any esports, I wouldn't wear it, but
That's great. Um, and speaking of clothing, guys, this episode of the Monte and Wolf Show is brought to you by Into the AM. Into the AM is a men's apparel company. As you guys can see, we are wearing some of their graphic shirts right now. Stand up. There you go. Wolf has a nice beach house. I have I think it's called the Ritual Tee with some dancing skeletons. But anyway, guys, right now you can head over to intotheam.com/LFN, use our code LFN, and you can get 10% off. And right now they have a up to 40% off basics sale that is going on, which includes a lot of items that you might need. Not the graphic tees that we're wearing, but the unbranded and branded tees. They have polos, they have flannels, they have long sleeves, they have Henleys, they have button ups, they have hoodies, they have underwear, they have athletic shorts, they have joggers, they have basically anything that you could want. And I'm a big fan of their clothing. It's been great to wear. I wear a lot of their unbranded tees myself. Now, for my day to day, be sure to check your sizes, guys. They have a little in the size chart. They have a little height weight grid because they do tend to run a little small. So you might want to size up. So just warning you on that right now. But please go over there and do that. And the 10% that you get from the code LFN is on top of the 40% you can get off on their basic sale. So
yeah.
any sales that they have, you get an additional 10% off, which is a crazy good deal. And they ship for free to a lot of countries around the world if you hit a certain price threshold. So it's not just free shipping to the United States, it's free shipping to a bunch of places in Europe as well. So check out their shipping and see. But even if they don't ship for free, they do ship almost anywhere. I mean, you can get it shipped to Korea, where both Wolf and I are, for example. So if you are in Korea, know that they do ship very expediently
Yeah.
to you here and for not that much money.
I recommend checking out the website and looking at the designs, because as you mentioned, you don't have to get a graphic tee. There's regular t-shirts you can wear, if you don't want that, but there's so many different designs. I'm sure that all of you guys will be able to find something that suits you. That's what I really like about this sponsor for us, is that we have so many different options of things we can wear on it. And I'm just longing for summer and beach times because it's still a little bit cold. But yeah,
Does
check
it
it out.
does it remind you of the South where you're from, Wolf? The beach houses
It
and the
does
palm
remind
trees?
me of, yeah, going to the beach with my family a little bit,
Yeah.
and getting in the ocean.
Very good. So thank you Into the AM for sponsoring us. We very much appreciate it. Let's talk about this T1 versus Gen.G game because it was in many ways just a bitter letdown. Um, which was even, I think, more disappointing, Wolf, because I was kind of hyped about the game 2 draft where I thought T1 like played the draft really well. Whereas game 1, I think, was kind of a drafting disaster by T1, and they really deserved to lose that game. But even so, it's surprising that T1 got 0 kills in that game. It had literally been years since T1 had gotten 0 kills in a game, and they took like a void grub and 2 towers and 0 kills, and that was the only thing they did the entire game. Like, it was close to a perfect game. It was embarrassing.
Well, the issue with the game itself, I mean, the draft had numerous issues, as you mentioned. The LeBlanc I thought was okay because it can, if you get to late game, you can challenge the Corki, you can threaten him, you can poke, you can get annoying with Lulu and stuff like that, and try to make it really tough to contest vision if you're ahead, if you're winning the game. The Jarvan I didn't like as much because they can re-engage super well. They have Valkyrie to get out of that, so it's never really going to be useful against Chovy. But the big problem in that game was that Zeus's wave management ended up getting him killed because Keen just all in on and then he got killed by Canyon early, and then or Keen killed him and Canyon ganked him, and then they just repeat ganked the Zeus top lane where he just wasn't able to farm properly. And once Keen got really big, like Keen 1v2'd when Owner came up to gank, and the Cassante was a huge problem. And I don't know if I want to blame Zeus for this one too much because he was pretty hard camped. But you know, the first death was definitely on him. And I came into this series wondering like what happens if Zeus is not playing Aatrox, because it feels like we never see that anymore, or we see it against a team that is so much weaker than T1 that Zeus will just beat any top laner and it doesn't matter. And I thought that he got punished really well by Gen.G in that game. And that was really the beginning of the end. And Chovy also just won lane super hard against Faker's LeBlanc. And I mean, I don't mean one lane as if like, you know, Faker's getting solo killed and he's losing plates, but like winning lane as hard as a Corki can into LeBlanc and feeling
Yeah.
comfortable and free farming. And he was so ahead of the clock in CS on the Corki that he was so big so early it just felt like team fights were not even a conversation for T1 with the Jace that can't even poke or hurt anybody. So that game was just a really, really one-sided stomp.
I mean, look, they blind picked the Jace in this game on blue side, right? And you do not win the 2v2 and top side with Jace Jarvan into Rel and Cassante. Even though this is 14-4, it's the nerfed version of Cassante, by the way. You don't win that 2v2. And Jace is very vulnerable in lane and top, especially if you lose your flash or you die early, right? Like, he relies on having constant pressure. And if you lose the 2v2, it becomes very, very difficult to maintain that, right? And I think we saw that in this game. And also, I think that Gen.G in general did a very good job of drafting to red side. Like, when you see Cassante and Gen.G, you don't know it's not going mid. You don't. Like, because Chovy plays that champion in the mid lane. Has he done it since the nerfs came through? No. But he could do it at any point in time, right? And so it really makes it difficult to ascertain where that pick is going. And also, as soon as they see the Lucian Nami, it's here comes the Aphelios Lulu, and you pick Jarvan so that you can lock down the Aphelios, but that's very difficult to do if he has wild growth from Lulu and like Lulu shields. And you can polymorph anybody who's attacking the Aphelios. So they really just had no damage by the end and no real win condition and no way to affect the back line outside of Faker getting super fed, which he didn't get. So the lanes didn't snowball. In fact, they didn't even really have an advantage in the bot side. Like, Pays and Lands have not been strong laners this split, although it has been getting better recently, but they were doing just fine into Lucian Nami with the Aphelios.
I feel like for both Pays and Lehens, like these are extreme comfort picks. Like I think by a large margin, in my eyes, Pays' best champion is actually his Aphelios. A lot of people will say Zeri because he played it a lot and he's had some really great moments on it, but his Aphelios seems to be, to me, his most comfortable champion. He lanes the best on it, he team fights the best on it, he's super comfortable with it, he doesn't really make mistakes. And then Lehens' Lulu is also extremely pressuring, extremely punishing. He's great at it in lane. His decision making in team fights is fantastic. He baited T1 a few times where Faker was like, maybe I can kill this Lulu. And then, he goes down to 20% health and then gets away and then can rejoin the team fight. I think they're both super good at these champions. And I do agree with your take that the laning phase is getting better recently, because I do think Pays and Lehens have really turned it up in terms of their early laning phase, which was kind of a liability in the first few
It
weeks,
was
even though they
bad
were
for a
winning.
while.
Yeah, even though they're winning games, you're like, well, it's not going to be about the bottom lane in this early game. Don't look down there. But it wasn't, F tier, but it wasn't at Gen.G tier. You know what I mean? It wasn't like they were a weak laning duo in general, but compared to the standard of Gen.G, I thought that was by far the weakest part of their early game. And I would put it on par with, like an aiming lane or something like that for a little while, but now it's significantly better. So that was a good sign. And I thought that was going to actually be the hardest part of each matchup going into this series with T1 and Gen.G. But at least in the first game, the Aphelios Lulu was pretty easy to play out.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know how much there is to say about game number 1. It felt like they didn't win the lanes, any of the lanes that they thought they were going to win. And at that point in time, you are dealing with a very heavily scaling team that has a huge tank line that you can't deal damage to. And if you dive in, there's wild growth. So it felt relatively doomed, and it was a pretty clean closure, all things considered, by Gen.G. Kenyon also had a great series, by the way, just super good on this rel. And then we go into game 2, and we get the same side. So T1's on blue side, Gen.G is on red side of this game. We get to see Chovy's Ahri, but this actually feels like it's a pretty playable draft for T1, right? It's an early pick of the Twisted Fate for Keen in the top side. And they had a counter pick prepared for that. They have a Tristana, which is going to push harder than the TF, can all in the TF, right? Zeus does a good job of kind of winning that lane and dueling Keen in the 1v1. Keen takes exhaust, Zeus takes cleanse on the Trist, cleanse flash. So anytime he wants to all in, Keen uses exhaust, Zeus uses cleanse and just all ins him because he actually has a combat ult.
Yeah.
And tons of single target damage. So it works really well. You see the Kalista and Ahri come in, and you pick Poppy. It's perfect. Owner's a great Poppy. Okay, we have an early game jungler. He can affect these lanes. He can stop the Ahri and the Kalista. Feels super bad to play into. Kalista and Renata Glask, not the strongest lane as a whole, especially against like a Lucian Nami. And you have the Talia. Again, another champ. You have Poppy and Talia into Ahri and Kalista. This feels amazing if you're T1. You have the lane counter in top side. You have the ability to prevent the dashes from Kalista and Ahri in 2 different ways. Oh, they have Renata Glask ult. Well, if we see it coming, we can just counter ult with Tidal Wave. Like, I was looking at this, I was like, I feel so much better about T1's draft this time around.
Well, the one thing I disagree on is the Lucian Nami versus the Kalista, and that was kind of the sticking point. If I remember the way the draft went, like they decided to choose Lucian instead of Kalista with Kalista up.
Sure.
And I think that it's really hard to all in that lane as Lucian Nami. And yeah, you can kind of trade early, and then it's about whether or not the Renata can hit the shields or if she can find a handshake angle. But then eventually the Kalista, after the first few levels, just kind of gets on top of you and can blow you up. So you really have to maintain advantages the entire time as that Lucian Nami lane. And if you make one mistake, like you're just not gonna get ahead there anymore. And so that was for me like the biggest part where I was like, okay, well, I think you're the best Kalista team in the LCK by far. Gumacaria can play so many different versions of Kalista.
I mean,
So
they
I
were
was
first picking Lucian on blue side, let's be clear. And just so you guys know, Pays' historical Lucian win rate is 46%. And he's only played 13 games. He doesn't play Lucian, and he doesn't play Lucian well when he does.
So it felt like to me it was a vote of lack of confidence for Pays and Lehens to play Callista, and they assumed that Pays was gonna just play like Aphelios
Well,
again. Well, actually, Aphelios was banned this game. Play a scaling AD carry again,
right.
and
I mean, I think that the Aphelios and Zeri bans were smart, but this is also the patch where Callista's Rend was pretty heavily nerfed, which then led to a Q max opportunity first Callista build. So maybe they were not confident in playing Callista under the changes because Pays showed a very different style of Callista than we've been seeing so far this year.
yeah, that's very true. And like I still think the Callista nerfs are, while significant, not enough to make her irrelevant. And the Renata synergy with Callista, where you can bail out, ends up being quite significant in this game, obviously. And
Sure.
that's like kind of the dual power of this bottom duo is just the ability to all in so hard and basically cheat death, and it's unfair because Callista can continue to do damage, and then even with the nerfs to Rend, get a more high value Rend during the
Yep.
bailout because you still continue to attack. And that was kind of for me. I was like, all right, well, that part I think isn't doomed, but it certainly felt a little bit strange to me that they would prioritize the Lucian over the Callista. And taking away the Zeri and the Aphelios, that's fine because that's that's the two champions Pays is most known for in scaling. They just don't want to deal with that. And they want to play a later game composition where they don't have to deal with that pressure. And then they have Faker on Talia. And Baker's Talia has been phenomenal when he has control of lane and when he can roam down and actually make impacts in the bottom lane. So you've got early game Poppy, which is good into Callista in the first place. You have a Lucian lane that with Talia coming down to help should be able to crush into the rel as long as they play it well. But the early game just didn't go as well as it should have. And I feel like Canyon way outplayed Owner 2 games in a row. And this week, Rel just looked super broken. The clear time is insane. Your objective contest is insane. Your re-engage is insane. She
Yeah.
has too much CC. Like, she has so much CC in her kit, and then her ultimate is actually just team fight warping. And they just keep, like, nerfing her and changing her, but ultimately it's
And she
not enough.
wins any 50-50, right? That's the
Yeah,
other
exactly.
problem. She just walks
Crushes it.
into an objective that you're taking and Q spites it, and then that's it. You just can't do shit.
Yeah. That probably needs a look. I don't know. She can take the Void Grubs, as well insanely fast.
Yep.
Because of her passive, or she could break the shields as well. And she just clears camps insanely fast too. So if you get information about the enemy jungler, is you can 3 buff them. I mean, she doesn't win like duels into every single jungler in the early game, but I just think she's so strong right now, and all of our best junglers are really picking her up right now. And even teams that aren't as good looked really good this week when they were playing Rel. I think the LCK kind of had a revelation this week.
A renaissance? Where do you want to go with this?
Um, I just it's very much
Re- re-
a pick that I think is going to jump up in priority a lot going into next week.
yeah, and it is now Canyon's most played jungler this year. I mean, he's been playing Rel, Sejuani, Maokai, and Lee Sin primarily. Um, and all of these provide primary engage for the team because that's the way that Gen.G wants to operate right now. Is like Chovy on like poke or skirmish champions and Canyon providing primary engage. And then what they do is they just kind of have Keen play Mr. Swiss Army knife in the top side and take like weird counter matchups. We got to see his Tristana in Dinar last week. We've seen the fucking Darius come out, right? Like Keen has been kind of their secret weapon this season. And I think that they have done an extremely good job. And again, crazy bias. Keen is my favorite player who's actively playing. But what I love about him compared to Zeus is, yeah, maybe you don't get 9 undefeated games on Aatrox, but what you get is a massive champion pool and an adaptive play style that really suits itself to the situation. Can he do a counter pick and carry? Absolutely, he can. Can he also just kind of like take one for the team and play a tank in the top side and blind pick it and play meta champions? Absolutely. He
Yeah,
probably had the biggest Cassante pop off this entire season so far.
yeah. I mean, that for me was going into this series what I thought was going to be the X factor, and it ended up being especially true in game one. I feel like just based on the fact that he crushed the lane, and had a lot of help from Canyon, and that was like the sticking point. That was the focal point. But then his flexibility in game two ended up really helping them out substantially there as well. And like I'm looking at Zayas' stats for this season because I wanted to actually look at the numbers because it feels like he's played Aatrox only and nothing else, but I knew that wasn't obviously
No,
true.
he's
But
played 11 champs. He actually has had a big champion pool. It's just
he,
many champions. He's only played one time.
he played Kennen in the first Gen.G series and lost with it. He's played only one game of Rumble, which is shocking considering how extremely meta Rumble was in the early parts of the season. Like it was the S tier pick basically next to the Cassante and Udyr. And then he played Zach for fun that one time. He's played one game of Twisted Fate, which he looked pretty good on. And then he has a smattering of other champions like counterpick Gwen to the Cassante, 4 games of Yone, and then 6 games of Cassante. So yes, he has a large number of champions that he's played, but I feel like he hasn't looked as flexible as other top laners in this meta because he hasn't really taken as many opportunities to play Cassante and draft and give his team more resources. For example, he's taken the Aatrox a lot of the time, and um, he's only played like one game of Udyr, which is basically, I think, to me, says that he has a specific way he wants to play. He thinks Udyr is less valuable than Aatrox and Cassante, which I think, as the patches have gone forward, we've kind of realized is definitely true. Um, so on one hand, I want to say he has a large champion pool, and we don't know what he thinks is like some of the best picks that he could play right now. Maybe he also has ideas like Keen has, but he's not allowed to play them in draft. But what we
Well,
also know is he's not doing that. He's not showing that. And so I don't want to say he's been exposed in this series. I don't think that's true. But I do want to see what happens when we get to best of fives with this player, especially best of fives against Gen.G, the relevant ones that are actually going to be competitive and interesting. Because I don't think it's going to matter if he faces against Hanwha Life Esports or Dplus or KT. Like he will just crush them anyways. Doesn't matter. But in a best of five, let's see how deep that goes because I think Keen right now definitely has that edge over him, and that might be a defining factor going into playoffs and finals.
well, part of it is just the way the teams draft, right? Is quite different, and the strategies. Like, for example, in terms of counter pick rate across all of the games they've played, Keen is the top laner in the entire league in counter pick rate at 67%. Zayas is the lowest counter pick top laner at 35%. So basically, Keen gets 2 counter picks for every 1 that Zayas gets. Now, a lot of this has been Zayas blinding Aatrox, and he's undefeated on it. So if you just fucking win your games, Wolf, and you can blind Aatrox, like why wouldn't you do that, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty logical. You could say that, well, Zayas is an extremely strong player who just wins literally 100% of his Aatrox and Cassante games, which is 17 out of his 29 games or something like that he's played so far. So why wouldn't you keep doing that? But at the same time, having Keen be able to counterpick a lot of this stuff, or 31 games, I should say, guys. It's 31 is the most recent one that he's played. But still, 17 on his top 2 champions he has 100% win rate on. So why not keep doing that? These are powerful champions for him and in the meta. Whereas Keen has played the same number of champions that Zayas has played, but he's played he doesn't have, 12 games on one of them or
Yeah, he
11
has a
games on one
larger
of them.
spread
He has
of
a larger
okay.
spread, across his champion pool. But yeah, I mean, the counters have been important for Keen, like the Olaf, the Darius, the Tristana. These kind of picks have been very critical to the success of Gen.G, because he provides them distinct advantages in the lane, as well as, the rest of the team is adaptive enough that they can afford to do this, particularly because Canyon has been, they first pick Maokai when they can get it, basically, is,
The scary
is what
thing to me
happens.
about Gen.G, and I think we talked about this a little bit last week, is when you have Keen playing a counter pick champion that puts pressure on in lane. Because I feel like since Rumbles have been out of the meta, like feels like 80% of top lane matchups in LCK right now are just wet noodle fights, and you don't even really pay attention to the lane. Unless a gank happens and you're like, oh, okay, well, it'll probably get away, but maybe he got a plate or something like that, and there's a cross map. But Keen puts pressure on in the lane when he gets these counter picks, and even when he doesn't have a counter pick, like Cassante to Jace isn't like per se like a counter to Jace, but when he's putting the pressure on those lanes and Canyon goes up there with him, that allows scaling picks on the bottom lane for FaZe to just kind of freely scale. Or, they end up winning top lane super hard because Keen has these picks that are going to actually transform the game. And so if you cross map and try to dive Pays on the hens, you better hope you get those kills. And if you don't, you're doomed. If you do, maybe Keen still transforms the game because he gets massive advantages topside. And it really makes you play around the bottom lane in a very different way, because you have to know that like Keen is going to get advantages if we don't deal with that. So you're kind of pulled apart top and bottom when Pays is playing those scaling picks, which is why I think it was great to ban the Zeri and the Aphelios going into game 2, because if you once again give Keen a counter pick and he puts pressure on Zeus and then Pays is just scaling, that's a problem. And that's kind of been a lot of the time Gen.G's MO, whereas T1 is just like, bottom is it. We go bottom, Faker goes bottom, Owner goes bottom, we push bot, we get plates, we eliminate the bottom lane from the game. And then Zeus is just better than everybody, so he'll be fine up there. It doesn't even matter. Just blind Aatrox, it's okay. And that's kind of like how T1 plays. And I think Gen.G is a little bit more multifaceted in their ability to draft and to play around different parts of the map. And that's what makes them to be scarier than T1, albeit slightly, because I think T1 sometimes has better coordination than they do in team fights. Sometimes T1 has better macro, but Gen.G know how to get the most out of their gold. They know how to play the early game and put pressure on different places. And you never really know going into a Gen.G draft where they're going to strike. And that's what's really scary and terrifying.
Well, I also think that Gen.G was never at the point in the game where we've seen them kind of falter, which is that sometimes in a more even game, in mid and late game, that's when they have more questionable shot calling. Their early game has been very strong, like very tight, I would say, but they are missing some of that acumen in mid and late game. Whereas that could be where T1 gets incredibly decisive, right? That's when you see the crazy like sneak barons and the picks and the split pushing and the macro awareness that has been really core to T1's identity for the last couple of years. But if Gen.G is just, shitting all over you from the start of the game, there's not really an opportunity to make that comeback. Even though we did see an attempt at that in game number 2, right? T1 was trying to like sneak out a Baron, right? Right at spawn at 20 minutes. But yeah, that like version of T1, I think, never got really a chance to operate in these games, because even though I would say that I enjoyed their draft of game 2 a lot more, they fucked up some really key team fights, and couldn't get really good advantages. Also, I mean, has to be said, Chovy played out of his mind on the Ari. Like, it was the charms he was hitting on Faker on the walls were crazy a lot of the time. And we saw T1 trying to engage, and like Keria looked off on the Nami frag. He was missing a lot of bubbles. He wasn't saving wave for Renata ult. Like, there were times when I think Keria had the opportunity to provide valuable CC to change team fights, and he missed, or he mistimed it.
Yeah.
Um,
Or used it
and
too
so that
early,
was,
which was a problem as well.
yeah.
Uh,
Um,
I think like the take for a lot of people for this one was, the LCK has been such a tier list season where that like Han was going to beat everybody below them, but they're never going to beat Gen.G or T1. Then Dplus and KT are going to have crazy weird games against each other, but then probably beat everyone below them, etc., etc. Kwangdong is just losing to everyone below them right now, but they won a few times, so like we'll see what happens with that. But a lot of people's take was, okay, well, Gen.G just beats T1 every time now, and they're actually even one tier above T1. I actually just don't think that's true. I think this series was 2 games of League of Legends that Gen.G got ahead in and had good drafting in won. But I don't think it means that it's going to be 3-0 in the first playoffs match and 3-0 in the finals, and Gen.G is going to 6-0 T1 to close out the first part of our year in the spring split. I don't think that's going to happen. I think T1 will learn a lot from this. I do think that the games were one-sided because of how dominant Gen.G is as a team and how hard it is to punish them. And like you said, we never got to the part where T1 actually is just better than them on the map oftentimes as a 5-man unit. That team fight coordination level just doesn't matter if you're that far behind in these games and can't actually break into team fights on even footing. So I'm hopeful that we will see a competitive series against them. The next two they face off against each other because we all know they're going to face off in the winners finals and they're going to face off in the grand finals. So I'm looking forward to a
I
bounce
mean,
back
any
performance
other
against Monte
result is kind of just unimaginable now, especially after we watched, Gen.G just completely bop Hanwha. Um, it just doesn't seem like there is another finals that could happen, unfortunately. There's not hope.
Yeah, I don't have any hope that Hanwha can do it, unfortunately. Like, that's the one team where you think maybe and we talked last week, like, is Hanwha the team that could be like the KT of last spring where they suddenly surprise you and bring T1 to 5 games? Um, After the Gen.G game that we watched earlier this week, I'm gonna say probably not gonna be the case. And please stop drafting Xayah. Stop it. Viper. Don't play that champion. You're very good at it, but it is not good. It is not you are not the problem, the champion is the problem. Don't play that. Stop playing that. You're opting into losing. You're like, "I would like to lose, please." And Gen.G said, "Okay."
Maybe he thinks if he'll lose, he'll get better teammates.
I mean, that is the Hanwha way. Who are they gonna get, next year? Like, are they gonna or is it gonna be the first time we get Chinese
Here
imports
we
and the
go.
Chinese team wins worlds?
I'm just Wolf. I'm just hoping that Scout's like horrific season on LNG. He's just sandbagging, so he'll get cut by the team, and then they can just go to Hanwha, and then we will have a fire summer split. Because that is actually the dream, guys. Because Scout has not looked individually good on LNG either, and LNG is ridiculously underperforming right now. I don't know if he's just quiet quitting because Tarzan isn't his jungler anymore, but holy shit, if Scout went to Hanwha and returned to form, this team would be fucking amazing.
Do you remember Scout, when he played against Faker in Busan and Worlds last year? That was, like, the moment for me where I was like, "Well, he went from being, like, the best mid laner in Worlds to being, like, the worst mid laner in top 8." I don't know what's going on with him. I don't know what's going on with, the sudden lack of form, but, I mean, Scout was supposed to be on KT in 2022, okay?
Yep.
Like, he's been highly sought after by a lot of Korean orgs, and I'd love to see him come back to Korea. But I mean, look, if JDG wins, like Ruler could go to Hanwha, man. It doesn't. I don't know because Hanwha just gets whoever is the best, and then they still can't make them into champions. It's wild. But they keep trying to do that. Uh, I mean, they got Doran and Peanut this time, who are obviously LCK champions, but it hasn't been and Delight, of course, but it hasn't been to me like that. I don't know what's going on with Hanwha because they seem to not coach well. There seems to be something in this org where they can't figure out how to make really great decisions because every other team that we've had challenge for like top 3, like Damwon in the past obviously was even top 1 for a while, but they had a coaching staff and drafting style where you were kind of blown away at moments, right? Where you were like, "Oh, this team is so oppressive, this team is so clean, this team is so impossible to deal with." And even KT last year, right? There were moments throughout the year where you're like, well, this team just cannot be beaten. They're so good. Their drafting is solid. And then Hanwha, I just never feel inspired. Like, yeah, first pick Xayah. I'm like, why are you doing this? You have amazing players. Like, what? Just please. Ah, Hanwha.
but but it is depressing that we thought maybe we would have more competition with some of the teams being the team shakeups. But I mean, KT is just significantly worse than they were last year. Dplus is somehow even worse than they were last year. Hanwha is arguably better, but not good enough to challenge. And even the hopes of Kwangdong have now gotten 2-0'd by Breon and fucking lost an insanely embarrassing series to DRX. So where's the hope, Wolf?
I mean,
Where's the hopium?
the hopium for me right now is weirdly enough on DRX and Yahoo and DRX coming to playoffs instead of Kwangdong because I'm ready for Kwangdong to be out. I do not want Kwangdong to be our 6-12, sixth place playoff team. The 6-12 scoreline does not inspire, but I think we're heading towards it. It feels like each and every passing day. Is that DRX series, oh, I guess we have to talk about. was so not it. It blew my mind. It was incredible. And when we were watching that
They
draft,
played terribly.
and we were watching that Malphite draft, we were all like, all of us on the desk were like, this never wins against Kwangdong's comp ever. And then Kwangdong just sat around team fights and like watched the Malphite walk close enough to ult either Bull or Andil, and then he pressed R and he did it,
Or both.
yeah, or both, and then he just
And
killed
then
them,
they didn't flash.
yeah, and they didn't flash. And I was like, because all you have to do is flash, you turn those fights. You have Senna, Seraphine, you have Volibear as well.
I mean, I
And
understand the principle of the Malphite, right? You see the Hui, the Seraphine, and the Senna, and you think, we can actually set up Malphite ults. I don't think it was as hopeless as you believe, personally, because you can set it up with Bard ult, which they did
yeah,
actually
they did.
quite successfully. So it's the combination of Jinzhao, Bard, and Malphite working together to dive the backline because there's just too many threats at a certain point. Or the Bard ult hits and then Malphite just times the ult right, and there actually isn't counterplay.
And they timed it well. Like
Yeah,
Andil and Rascal had
they
great
missed it.
timing.
They missed it too, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there were times. Um,
I mean, but the real sin was just the real sin was just a macro sin, Wolf, in that first game, which is that they fucking like engaged in a 3v5 in the bot side at Drake while using TP. Bulldog just TP's mid instead of TPing to the fight. And then we see Yehu just TP into the fight and they TP their Cassante late. And then they lose this fight, this very crucial fight at Drake after they were doing a good job of like holding Teddy Smolder down. And then we see like Bull TP into the bot side and then just die. Also, Bull Seraphine is trash, man. It is fucking
it was
trash. He
so
doesn't
bad.
even know how to use ult. Like he just wouldn't use ult for 2 games. It was fucking crazy to watch.
It was really bad, but like he's played it a ton. He played it a ton in challengers, and now he's played it here in the LCK several times as well. And clearly, that's how they want to play it. Where they end up, swapping. Um, they end up swapping Andil to like the Senna role, even though he's the support. And by the way, I said Andil earlier instead of Pleta. I meant to say Pleta for the Bard. But Andil is, not an 80 carry player, and that we have seen this before with Senna, and it's like acceptable to put Senna onto the support. Like this, a lot of teams do this, a lot of different
Sure.
regions do this. Like Reckless does this. But Bull did not look inspiring in this game or in this series at all because he ran it back because it's CV Max. Uh, and if you're gonna play this, you kind of have to be really good at it because if you set the bar this low, then you will just get smashed by DRX and you will get smashed by Smolder. And then the team fights too that DRX took with the early Smolder ults, because that's all Smolder is in the early levels on Dragon fights, is he presses R towards them and hopes that they're kind of grouped up. And that's kind of what happened in some of those early game fights. And Teddy is just stacking with that. He's helping to offer damage. You have to be ready to punish this Smolder pick with Senna. You have to be extremely proactive. You have to be on the map. You need to be looking for kills and ganks nonstop. And Cuz is like the perfect guy for that, but they just couldn't get it done at all. Macro was bad, as you mentioned. Team fighting was abysmal.
I mean, the teleporting was fucking horrible. Like the
Bulls
teleport usage
teleport
was
bottom,
actually
where he
horrible.
just teleported to die. That wasn't ideal.
Dude, they teleport into it on multiple occasions. So their first like series of macro play teleports were 3 of them. Cuz, Bull, and Andal are in the bot lane moving up towards Drake. Bulldog then TPs into mid lane, even though he knows Yehu has TP and Yehu is TPing into the fight. So he just can't get there on Hui fast enough. Then Dudu TPs late, dies in that same fight. And then immediately after that, Wolf, what happens? They take Drake, DRX takes Drake. Then Bull TPs into the bot lane on his turret and just gets dove and died. So they basically wasted, count them, 3 TPs to lose a tower, get killed twice, and Drake. It's
Yeah.
fucking terrible.
And Bull was like TPing bottom lane. I don't know if he thought he was going to save that turret. He wasn't. There were like, it wasn't even a full wave of minions, if I remember correctly, that was coming to the turret for him to CS. Like, it was just super bizarre, man. This team is under immense pressure, I feel like, because of the losing streak. Um, and brain not work good when under pressure, apparently, because these are decisions we have not seen this team make really in the past this season. Like they haven't really been this brain dead in terms of playing the map.
No, if anything, you would say that their macro has generally been one of their strengths.
Yeah, and their late game, especially, when they have Bulldog scaling up on something like the Hui, and he's ready to poke and move towards objectives and play slow. He's been pretty intelligent at those parts of the game, but I don't know what happened in this DRX series, but we call it the Kwangdong collapse, where you get to the second round robin, maybe a week or two in, and then suddenly everything is just boom. Like nothing is working, nothing is smart, nothing is intelligent, nothing makes sense. Like we saw it last year, and we're like, oh, hopeful for Kwangdong. Team seems pretty good. And then suddenly it's just like, well, this team is on a massive losing streak and nothing makes sense about how they're playing. And macro decisions are poor. Laning phase is poor, oftentimes for Bulldog, unfortunately. Sometimes he just gets completely wrecked. And Yehu, is I don't want to say he's great, but he is a massive improvement over Satab that I was kind of calling for a really long time. And because we had two mid laners that just were not even close to LCK level, and they were Satab and Call Me, and both of them got replaced finally. So I was rejoicing because I've been asking for this for a really long time because I just couldn't watch Satab like.
What are you talking about? Call Me was playing again this week, Wolf.
Oh, well, I mean, was it correct? We'll go back and watch those games. I don't want to talk about Nongshim this week. But yeah, should he have been? Is the question we all have to ask. After Fiesta lost game one and then but actually had a good game and was putting pressure on in the lane. Anyways, but those two players just are not ready for LCK and they were warping games because of it. Like it was just really, really bad. Meanwhile, you have a Yehu coming in playing, his champion pool has been Karma and Hui basically. So he's not massive so far, but he's serviceable. And suddenly DRX look like they can kind of do stuff, like they're being a little bit more proactive on the map. And DRX might be the best team to make the run to playoffs right now because I don't think it's FearX. I don't think it's Bro. I mean, Nongshim, it's either DRX or Nongshim, or the two teams that could challenge Kwang.
I mean, DRX did lose to Breon this week, just to be clear.
Yes.
Which also, if they had won that game, they'd be 4-10 now, and then maybe actually able to get into playoffs instead of Kwangdong.
Yeah, that series was also not
because DRX still has to play Gen.G, T1, and KT. So I don't think they're making it to playoffs.
But what if Monte? But like I don't know Bro's schedule, but I just don't think
KT, Nongshim, Gen.G, FearX.
Yeah, you have to win too many of those to catch up to Kwangdong.
Also, you know, a lot of it could hinge on them beating Kwangdong, which I still don't think is going to happen, or FearX beating Kwangdong, because Kwangdong has Hanwha, FearX, Dplus, and KT. So Kwangdong, if they win one more match out of 4, it should be very difficult for them to get knocked out of playoffs.
But I think they can only beat FearX, maybe.
That's all I need to do.
Yeah. So I'd be that's scary though. FearX has DRX, Kwangdong, Nongshim, and Bro. So
they have the softest schedule for sure.
Yeah.
Like FearX actually has the easiest schedule by a lot.
Yeah.
But I mean, I fucking watch this team and they suck a big one.
Yeah,
they suck a big one.
I
had to watch them. I had to watch them lose to an incredibly hit performance by Dplus yesterday, where they absolutely could have won that series.
Yeah, I was casting that. It wasn't fun.
How did you feel about that?
It wasn't fun for anyone.
Especially that third game where they just refused to use Nocturne and Nico combo.
That game where Kellen ulted Nico clones for the whole game and then actually ulted by accident the real Nico to win the game. It wasn't actually accidental. It was a really good, smart play. But like, That whole game was just killing me, Monty. I was like, well, execute. He's the most aggressive person. Will he flash under turret and nearly die, or flash or after Maokai going in on the twisted advance under turret and then have to flash away and lose his lane for Henna instantly? Yes. Nico ult with good angle with Nocturne turning the lights off. Hell no, I'm not going in on that. But I will go in at level 2 in the turret. It's a hard comp to play out, but they had all the tools to do it. And if they can't pull it off, they just can't pick it. If you can't play it, you can't pick it. And then Dplus like just were like waiting. They're like Dplus is playing like really safe, like, hold on, wait a second, like where are they? Oh, they're just not here. They're like, oh wait, is he in the bush? Killing like hawk shots. He's like, no, just not gonna. Like, are they on Drake? Like, they're gonna try to turn as Nico's in the bush. Wait, they're not there. Oh yeah, they're. I see them. They're showing in lane. Okay, they're just gonna give us a dragon. Okay, it was like such a bizarre game, so weird. Uh, I don't want to talk. I don't want to talk about FearX because they haven't improved. Like, that's the thing for me that really hurts me about FearX the most is they haven't improved. If anything, I feel like they've regressed. Clear looked a little bit better this week, slightly. Like his Cassante was pretty decent. But DRX, they got a new mid laner. They look better. That's a positive. Bro is winning sometimes, which is good. They figured out that they just want to play slow and play Smolder. That's cool, bro. You figured it out. That's an improvement. That's a step in the right direction. FearX, I don't have anything good to say about what's getting better on this team. So I just don't like when you talk about them, you just end up being mad and disappointed. And Kwangdong is the same story for me right now, where the only thing I could say about them is they're just playing worse than they were before. And it's like a slippery slope of worse. It's not just like, oh yeah, they were also equally worse this week to where they were worse last week than when they were actually playing well. No, it's like a step down every week. Like, by the end of it, they might be the worst team in the LCK if they continue on this trajectory. I don't like
I
it.
was very disappointed with their match versus DRX. It sucks to watch this team and their decline because they were genuinely very exciting for a while. But I think, Cuz playing, he really did bail them out a lot of the time and like have to make hero plays. And it was unreasonable to expect any player, unless he was literally going to be MVP of LCK, to continue to do that for the whole season because he was like 1v9ing at times.
Yeah. So, I mean, my dream is DRX makes some miracle run. I didn't actually look at the strength of schedule until you mentioned it, I'm gonna be honest, Monty, and I'm like, all right, well, that's probably not gonna happen.
The
But that
last
was
week
my
is
dream.
Gen.G and T1, dude, in the
Yeah,
same
no,
week. Like, I just don't see them winning both of those,
no, I
and
don't see them
or
winning.
even one of them.
I see them beating FearX, but I don't see them taking a game off of Gen.G or T1. Maybe a game off KT, but probably
I
not.
mean, they can beat KT. KT is a clown fiesta. I mean, KT was kind of in danger versus Nongshim for a little bit there. Like, they're not looking amazing.
Yeah. I mean, certainly not. I think this season a lot of it's revolved around some weird patch stuff, like the Senna being super broken, Aatrox being super broken, a lot of the early quirky itemization where you got the Malignance Eclipse broken
Right.
interaction there. A lot of the season been pretty wild. I think things will probably calm down when we move into summer, and maybe teams will actually use the off season well, grow, improve. We're only sending 2 teams to MSI, so there's it's not like your whole top 4 is gonna
No, no,
be
no, no.
lined up.
And you know what? Either it's going to be T1 and Gen.G, or there's going to be some fucking KT or Hanwha miracle, and we're going to send a good team no matter what. Right.
Yeah,
So
but I just think like
there's
this.
not that much concern. I mean, I am concerned about D+ generally because talking about how the rest of the split is likely to shake out, like it seems like it'll be Gen.G, T1, Hanwha in those 3 in that order. But the question would be who is 4th through 6th. It's going to be hard for D+, KT, or Kwangdong to drop out of playoffs. But D+, who's currently in 4th place, Their strength of schedule is T1, Gen.G, Kwangdong, Hanwha. So they literally have to play all 3 top teams, and then Kwangdong, if they get their shit together, maybe another potentially okay team. Whereas KT has Brion, DRX, Hanwha, and Kwangdong. So like significantly easier schedule. So it seems like because KT's only a game back that they should be able to overtake Dplus in this round.
Oh yeah, definitely. I just want to see like my biggest hopia, my biggest goal is obviously I don't want T1 versus Gen.G finals every time, but I think it's a bit late for that. But maybe in summer it'll change. But I want to see now transformation between spring and summer for some of these teams that have strong rosters. They're not, super teams, but they have strong rosters. Like Kwangdong is decently strong. I think KT and D plus definitely strong rosters. Absolutely. Lucid transforms, maybe you end up doing something great in summer. I want to see them take games off of our top teams. I do not want another tier list season. But I think a lot of this season again was about the weird meta, some super busted champions that are really good for specific players, like Aatrox, for example, and Azir, which is now disabled, at least for the. I don't know if it's going to be enabled next week or not, but it was disabled for this week. But this season was really warped by a lot of strange meta stuff and teams trying to figure out their coordination. So naturally, it ended up this way. But I don't want to go into next season where I send my predictions in our LCK group chat and I look at everyone else's predictions and they're exactly the same as mine and they're exactly the same as everyone else's every week because we know everything that's going to happen, and no upsets occur between top teams. I mean, the Gen.G T1 series is one of the most interesting prediction things we had of the season, and 2 of all of the people across LCK went for Gen.G. Me and Chronicler. Everyone else went for T1, including on the Korean side. But that was the unique pred. It's like 2 different people went for a different thing.
I'm actually surprised it wasn't split. That's a hard match to call. I wonder what the logic behind going for T1 there was, just because of the KT loss from Gen.G.
I think I mean, from talking to most people, they just thought their bottom lane was going to be the stronger aspect of the game that was going to win it for them because that's kind of how T1 plays around. And I didn't talk to all the Korean casters. Might have been just the fans will like this prediction more, and who knows? So I'm just gonna go T1 because that's often how it is, as you know. The fan prediction on Twitter was something like 85, 86% for T1, even though this matchup is obviously so insanely close.
Well, Wolf, I'm glad I saved doing my power rankings till this week because now I just get to insult all the T1 fans who flamed my last power rankings for me putting BLG over T1. So, how do you like it now, dumbasses?
I mean,
Get absolutely bopped by Gen.G. You can be in 3rd place, still behind BLG.
I think T1 could bounce back in playoffs though.
Of course, yeah.
I do think that we'll
They're
learn
still a very good team, obviously.
we'll learn very little
see,
about them.
Wolf, the way that these idiot T1 fans work is that they think that power rankings are this team will a team above in the power rankings will 100% of the time defeat a team lower in the power rankings than them. And they don't think like a team could be number 1 in the power rankings, but have a very bad matchup into the 7th team in the power rankings. That's a possibility, right? Yeah. They're better against all other teams except for that one specific team and that one specific play style. But also, the top 3 teams in the world, like we're probably talking like a 55-45 edge, right? We're not saying that this result happens 100% of the time between number 1 and number 3. There could be just a very, very fine line there in terms of who would actually come out. But you have to just make that evaluation, and then it's reflected in the rankings. But the thing is like there could be the number 1 team could beat the number 10 team like 80-90% of the time, but the number 1 team might beat the number 2 team 52% of the time, right? That's a thing.
So I mean, that's the thing about power rankings too, is they're somewhat opinion based, and if it was so obvious that number 1 would beat number 2, and number 2 would beat number 3, and number 3 would beat number 4, etc., then why the fuck would you even make a power rankings? Because it's just so obvious.
Yeah.
Then you just have the LCK standings, where number 1 beats number 2, number 2 beats number 3, number 3 beats number 4, 100 fucking percent of the time.
There's also other considerations, Wolf, such as power rankings are designed to take a snapshot of that moment, but that's not necessarily my prediction, right? Like for example, FPX is a team that I think is going to do not very well in LPL playoffs, but we must put them in top 10 in the power rankings right now because of who they've beaten recently. And it's like, just because a team is good in the regular season does not mean that I think they're going to, defeat a team lower than them on the power rankings with a bunch of fucking veterans. That's a more like well-rounded structure, because when it comes to best of fives or playoffs, like, you tend to side with more veteran players under pressure, and with the experience of playing longer series. So there's a lot to consider, right?
Yeah.
But it is just hilarious to see the T1's fans like reaction to me putting T1 as number 2 in the world. Meanwhile, I've noticed this, Wolf. No T1 fan can ever tell me why their team is so good when they have literally lost 3 out of 4 finals in domestic finals that they've played with this roster. And they won 1 world championship and 1 split of LCK in their first split, and literally nothing fucking else for the last 2 years. Nobody can tell me why that is, but apparently T1 is still the absolute greatest, right?
It has a T1 logo on it, Monty. It's the best. No, I like. I mean, I told you guys that that like I actually got yelled at like in the real world walking around Busan after I predicted LNG to beat T1. By
You
T1
didn't tell me
fans.
that.
No, I didn't tell you that.
Yeah,
I
that's
actually had people
crazy.
yelling at me on the street. And I actually had 2 T1 fans come up to me and start talking to me and ask me why I predicted it and told me I was wrong. It was wild because there were a ton of, obviously, League of Legends fans in Busan, and I was staying in Gwangali, which is one of the most popular places to be
Right.
in Busan, so, like, there were just T1 fans everywhere, like, wearing T1 hoodies and stuff like that, and jackets and jerseys and all that. And, like, I got accosted by fans. And I'm sure you might have seen, like, Brendan got this crazy DM yesterday, where somebody told him, like, "I hope you get cancer and die," basically. Brendan Valdez, one of the casters. And, like, it's not just T1 fans, but some of the insane toxic, fandoms out there for League is crazier than I have ever experienced in any esport in my entire life, and
Hey, look, just be glad you skipped the worst of the TSM and Fnatic eras, Wolf, because those
Sure.
were even worse than this
Well,
somehow.
I mean, I was a StarCraft caster, like, and this is actually miraculously, like, the messages that we get, the DMs that we get, the way that we are treated by some of these fans, and not just T1 fans, like I say, is actually out of
Well,
control crazy.
you know what's crazy, Wolf, is like, I'm the one who predicted T1 correctly to win every single of their playoff matches at Worlds. I thought they were going to win the whole thing. I predicted them to beat a JDG, right?
Well, I love that I am extremely biased for and against T1 and extremely for and against Gen.G every time they play. Let me tell
I
you
know,
guys
but it's
what.
like
I will be like, because Wolf always glazes for these. Yeah, you know what? I fucking will glaze for the 2 best teams in my tournament who are better than everyone else.
exactly, of
I
course.
will hype them up. My bad. I will say they're
It's your
really good when
job.
they're really good.
but
Shit.
but I just think it's funny. Like, they're like, Monty, how could you dare put BLG number 1? Yet I'm the guy who correctly predicted T1 when they were an underdog to beat JDG. So I'm the one who correctly predicted T1, but now they think I'm wrong because I think BLG was better. But I was right when I said T1 was better, right?
I foresee this. I don't even know how we got on this topic, but I foresee this episode will have a lot of comments, Monty. I'm all
Very
for it.
reasonable
Boost the
comments too.
algorithm.
Very, very reasonable comments. We do have a lot of upcoming matches though to wrap up this show, guys. The playoff run is going to be very exciting. We're gonna have a lot more to discuss this next week. Dplus is playing Gen.G and T1. We have T1 versus Hanwha, which we're hoping is going to be a good match. And even like, Kwangdong versus Hanwha is very impactful. And then we have a lot of kind of mid-table matches that are going to decide, if a team can go on a miracle run to knock Kwangdong out of the last playoff spot, or for seeding and kind of the avoidance of the dreaded 6th seed where you have to play Hanwha in the first round, which is probably a death sentence for any of these less adept playoff teams.
Yeah. It's a week that, you know, if you turn back time and you see D plus T1, you see Hanwha versus T1, it feels very exciting. It feels very close. Dplus Gen.G, historically one of the most exciting series we've ever had
Yeah,
in the
usually that one delivers.
Yeah.
That's delivered for years now.
But if you look at current time, feels like these will ultimately all be 2-0 stops. But I hope I'm wrong. But I know where my predictions are going. And I'm not going to D plus or Hanwha. But I'm hoping that, maybe I'm wrong. Because maybe, at the end of the season, that's when it matters the most to actually be on form. And maybe Hanwha comes in with a new read. We end up with an upset win, and then they make a cool run into playoffs where they're in super good form. We're gonna learn a lot these last 2 weeks, especially this week 8. So, if everything is as we expect and it is the smash, the 2-0 stomps that come through, well, I mean, we'll have that confirmed. I'm hoping otherwise, but I'm not predicting otherwise.
I hope we have an exciting upset to discuss next week. And we'll be back then with more Monte and Wolf show for you guys. See you next week.